Okay, so I'm going to break down the twin flame journey in binary code. I'm going to break it all the way down to binary code because if I feel like every time I try to approach this topic with any type of emotion, it gets conceived as ego. So I'm going to just do the whole thing ego, and so people can have a comparison, because if you have an unregulated nervous system and you try to relate to something on an emotional level or perceive it through your emotions, you're perceiving backwards basically. So I'm just done trying to relate to people on an emotional level because they're just incapable of even perceiving. So I'm just going to break it down in ones and zeros instead. So, okay, let's just talk about the singularity for a minute. I'm going to use some symbols so that people can understand also, that are only going to be people on the twin flame journey are going to understand. So it's going to cut out a bunch of the people that think they're on the journey and aren't, because only people that are on the journey are going to relate to this. So the singularity, let's say the singularity is a 1 and a 0. Okay, on the back, we'll say the back of the body, say, is a black hole, and the front of the body is a mirror. The black hole is a 0 and the mirror is a 1. Okay, so now what happens is this. As we begin to break cycles, things that we're overstepping or we're allowing people to overstep in our life, what happens is these cycles get cut, and they end up forming into one big portal. We'll call it a portal for you to receive your information. After you cut all of the things out of your life, it's going to focus into one area. It's going to be an experience. Obviously, the twin flame journey is an experience you have with another entity, but you're really having it with yourself. So now, when we talk about different entities, we all have a mirror on the front and a black hole on the back. Now, depending on how big, which is your radius, we're going to call the black hole and the mirror, is how far you can stretch your ability, which means how far you could get outside yourself to do healing work and different, and also destroy stuff. Your black hole, right? So the radius is gauging how big or small what things can be affected. So you got to remember, there's always a bigger mirror, there's always a bigger black hole. So when we are approaching different entities, we have to be aware of if this entity has a bigger radius than us, is the main thing of it. Okay, so now with the twin flame journey, what you have is a mirror and a black hole. Now, the key to this interaction is we are trying to integrate other black holes or other mirrors or whatever into our form to get our radius bigger. Every time we absorb a black hole, then our radius increases. So now you got to keep in mind on this twin flame journey another thing. You got to keep in mind the archetypes that you're operating in, because say like a lower archetype, let's just say the empath. That archetype is like a super bumpy road. but it's on a lower speed. Where if you're talking about like the Sigma INFJ, that is a more smooth ride, but it's faster. So the load on the Sigma INFJ is heavier than the load of the empath. So we have to remember when we're approaching these black holes, we got to remember what, like, we have to downshift, or else we have to gauge the load of the archetype that we're operating in. Because these higher dimensional entities, you know, we want to operate in higher vibrational archetypes because the ride is way smoother. But sometimes we have to downshift because when we're trying to absorb things, if we're displaying too big of a radius, then it's going to be harder to balance the experience, let's say. So now, when you're absorbing a black hole, you got to remember you're going to go into the experience with your black hole facing their black hole. So basically, you're going in backwards to try to absorb your information from that black hole into yours so you can increase your radius. So as you're absorbing that information, you're a mirror on the other side. Now, a couple of different things can happen when you start trying to absorb this black hole. If you lean too far into the black hole with too much of a load, the mirror is going to crack. Or if you're leaning into the black hole and you try to pull away, like you see something that scares you and you jerk, the mirror will break in that case too. So there's a couple of different ways the mirror can fracture when trying to absorb a black hole. Now, fracturing, if you fracture the mirror while you're trying to absorb a black hole, it's not that big a deal, but you have to remember now you've got fractals. So what happens with the fractals is you have the original access point, which is your twin flame. You are going to have to dissolve that relationship first, and then you're going to have to call back all of your energy, and then you'll end up calling in the fractals, and then you just deal with the fractals separately. You won't have to lean into them. The information will be right on the surface, usually if they're small pieces. So what happens is, if you don't absorb this black hole, or another thing that can happen is if you try to attack the mirror will break. Like if you're a black hole and you're attacking the mirror, it's gonna fracture and fracture and fracture. So what that leads to looks like gang stalking, because now your information is fractured throughout. It's going horizontally instead of vertically into a portal like this. It's fractured out across your reality, and then you have to start picking up pieces, because what happens is your energy will turn on you. So all those different fractals if the mirror is broken, you have to focus them back into one point, or you have to just collect them one by one to bring them back to the mirror being whole again. You have to come back to a 1, because if the mirror fractures, then maybe you have a 2, or maybe you have a 3, maybe you have a 5, maybe it breaks into 5 pieces, and you have to first take care of your original portal, and then you have to go search for the little black holes that fractured off of the mirror. So what happens is, if you are being gang stalked, that is basically an extroverted example of schizophrenia. It's the same thing that's happening to a schizophrenic on the inside. They're having miniature black holes that are attacking them from within. And when you are on the twin flame journey and you don't approach the situation with discernment and understanding, what will happen is you'll break the mirror and it'll fractal. And so basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to absorb up all of our pieces of our energy that we've broke in different directions. So it'll be easier, like whenever my mirror cracks, I'll come back into center and I'll do like 2 or 3 days of meditation, because you got to remember the fractals can come back to you in any person. So I try to separate myself from any contact. I'll just shut my phone off, and for like 3 days I'll try to meditate and come into center, and then I will turn my phone on and go back into the world, and those pieces will be like waiting right there for me. They'll be right on the surface. I'll call them into me through, and they can come in from any direction. They'll just come from any direction. You'll recognize them because it'll have the same energy. You'll be able to see the lessons. You'll recognize it. It's got the same energy. And then what happens is once you've collected up all your fractals, you come back into being one piece again. But you can't be one piece if your mirror is fractured. So once you pick up all of the pieces, then you're going to be back into a bigger diameter with your black hole and your mirror. So that's the ego driven twin flame journey. I hope everyone doesn't try to make it sound like heartless or whatever, but that's what it is on the ego side. So